today are the victims of kidnappers and the families who suffered through the terror of their abduction. Now, as we've heard, a child can disappear virtually anywhere within a matter of moments. Linda Saumer knows about all of this firsthand. She hadn't taken her eyes off of her 4 children for more than a few seconds when the unthinkable happened. What were you doing?
I was going into the gas station to pay for the gas. I just finished filling up.
How many times have we done that?
Yeah.
We all have to do it. First of all, these days, you know, with the self-serving you got to go inside to pay and all that kind of stuff.
We were at the pump right in front of the window, and there was no line. We live in a real small town. It's just a little farm community. Things like this just don't happen. And I went in.
4 kids are in the car.
4 kids are in the car. They're older. They don't want to go in with me for every step.
How old are they at the time?
They're 11, 9, 8, and 13 months.
Okay.
I wasn't even at the counter yet to write out my check, and Alex came screaming, running in, the van, so I just dropped everything, ran out as the van was peeling off.
Gone?
Yes, tires squealing, and I started running after it, and needless to say, I couldn't catch up to it.
Now, Katie is here, who is Linda's stepdaughter, and she can explain best of all what happened. You're sitting in the car and this guy just jumps in?
He was in the front seat, and I fell back because he was going, and Alex jumped right out.
How fast was he going?
Really fast. I can't even tell. Maybe 100. Maybe
He was going
an hour.
100 miles an hour because the people who were chasing him reported that he was going 100 miles an hour. And then what were you doing? Because you're thinking pretty quick here. Because what were you trying to do?
I was trying to get people's attention by screaming and waving my hands. And then I also started to throw things out the door.
You're trying to leave a trail.
Yeah, so that people noticed if he didn't stop where we were going, if they could follow where I left the stuff.
How long, Linda, did all this take?
The whole ordeal until it was stopped was about 45 minutes, the longest 45 minutes of my life.
Katie, finally he stops, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And why does he stop?
He stopped to let us out, and so he slammed on the brakes, and the door just flew shut. And then I opened the door, and Zach was sitting right next to me, and he jumped out, and then he said just to get out, and I tried to get Hans out, but I couldn't get Hans out because there was a buckle holding his chest in. So I unbuckled the seatbelt, and somebody was following, and he started to drive off. And I grabbed onto the door, and he dragged me along the ground.
You held on the door for about 30 feet, and then you didn't have enough strength, and you just fell off?
Well, there was something ahead. I could see something in front, so I let go, and he went straight up a driveway thing.
Straight up a culvert?
Yeah.
And finally got caught, and your youngest brother was in the car.
And he still was going really fast.
It went on for another 15 miles.
Oh, I didn't know
He
that.
kept speeding down. Yeah, and he went through
So
the
you got
next
the
town.
little one in the car with the guy for another 15 miles?
Yeah, and his car seat was unstrapped, and it was wedged apparently between the door, the handle on a van, and trying
Is
to
he
fly
finally
out
caught?
the door. Yes, he was, after he sped through the next town and hit a little boy on his bicycle.
And then he was finally caught.
Yeah.
And your
they
son?
drove him into the ditch.
And your son is fine.
Yes.
And was he convicted?
He pled guilty.
And how much time is he serving?
Sentencing isn't until the end of this month.
What would you like to see him get?
Well, the maximum, but that's 5 years.
That's all it is? When we come back, we're going to meet a couple who was shattered when their 5-year-old was kidnapped in his sleep. He was just a few feet from his parents at the time. What happened changed this family forever after this. Well, when you're managing a restaurant, you get up early, right?
Yes, sir.
That's exactly what happened to our next couple. Mike and Tammy Strickland, their 5-year-old son, James. You were going to work early, right?
Yes, sir.
Tammy, you were driving them?
Yes.
What happened?
Well, she had to go to the dentist that day, and the car was not running right, so she took me to work at 5 in the morning, and she had ended up falling asleep because it was an hour drive to get to where I was working at. And James was asleep in the back seat, completely covered up in the blanket, because that's what he did. He pulled it all the way over his head. And we pulled up in the front, which is right in front of the front doors of the restaurant, and I walked in to clock in and to warm the computer up because it takes a few minutes to get it on, and she said, well, I'm going to come in and get a cappuccino. And I went to turn the car off, and she said, no, don't turn the car off, it's cold outside. She said, leave it running so we can leave the heat on. And I said, all right. So we got out the car and walked in, and I went to clock in, and she walked out of sight. So I was sitting there messing with the computer, and I looked up and saw the car pull off. And I said, well, I thought to myself, man, I can't believe she got past me without me even noticing that she walked out the front door. And as I was thinking that, she walked around the corner with her coffee in her hand. So I ran out the door. And
At first we thought somebody was messing around with us, that somebody that worked at Shoney's jumped in the car and was taking off with it, or just driving around the back of the building.
right when I ran back in from seeing the car pull out, the back door was ringing as she was dialing the number. It was one of the waitresses coming in, and I asked her if she had seen the car, and she said no, and I just grabbed the keys out of her hand and jumped in her car. But before I could even get to the road, Tammy had already gotten through the police, and they had gone past me. Before I could even pull out of the parking lot, they were out of sight.
How long was this chase?
I didn't stay in the car for more than 10 minutes before I came back to Shoney's, because as soon as I turned the corner to get on the road, I couldn't see anybody. I mean, there was blue lights everywhere for a second, and then they were gone. So I just went back to...
How long did all this last?
It was about 4.5 hours before we got James back.
How do you feel like during those 4.5 hours?
When it first happened, we virtually watched the car drive off. And I just felt like falling, you know, like it's all over with. My son's in the back seat of that car. But I guess I kind of kept my cool. I ran back in Shoney's and dialed 911, and I told the lady, I said, my car's just been stolen, and I told her where it was going, and she said that they had to do a auto theft. And I said, no, you don't understand. There's a 5-year-old in the back seat of that car asleep. And I heard her drop the phone, and she was dispatching to the cops, I guess. And I mean, it was just seconds, and there was cops flying by.
What ends up happening?
Obviously, he just went right up the street, or he or she. We never found out who it was, and turned and circled back around behind Shoney's and then went the other direction. So he just got off the main street and went down some back streets and got on another street. And he drove the car to Georgia, Augusta, Georgia, which is the next state over, and just pulled it in front of a convenience grocery store and left it with the keys in it.
The keys in it? Was this a joyrider?
We think he just needed a ride.
Man, I would assume that he just wanted to
This
ride
happened at
home.
5 o'clock in the morning, and I think when it got daylight, he realized that James was in the back of the car and decided
He didn't
was
even
gonna
know
park.
anybody was back there. Because James never moved the whole time.
No.
He just slept through it all.
Slept through the whole
The cops
thing.
woke him up when they found him.
James, you slept through everything. Do you remember
He's a
the
heavy
ride?
sleeper.
Don't remember the ride. So you were fortunate.
Very.
We'll talk about how kidnapping obviously changes lives forever, but it affects some families in surprising ways. We'll find out about that next. Yes.
You had the kidnapper had a 13-year-old son. Where was the son?
Whatever happened to him?
Days before the kidnapping, he had told his ex-wife that he was going to relocate, and so he handed the boy over back to her to live with her.
You know, two of these stories happened in very small towns. Of course, we think in this country, boy, you want to feel safe about your life? Move to a small town. What's happened in Pine City, Minnesota?
Well, there have been different instances where people have been driven off the road.
So
but
it's shaken up the town. Mm-hmm. And how about in Aiken, South Carolina?
Small town. I drove an hour to work, like I said, and the hour I drove was
So
through.
are people beginning to think differently now in Aiken when they read about this?
I would hope. I would hope that everyone would feel differently. It can happen to anybody now.
And
Anybody,
Rick,
anywhere.
As we end up, because a lot of us, I mean, I'd like to know, how do you give up everything you dreamed about materially?
Very easy, boy, because the material things just don't mean as much to you. And my son and I now have father and son carpentry, and I love it. I love every day of my life up there in the mountains, doing the carpenter work that we do.
Great.
It's been a great life now.
We'll be back right after this. The Maury Povich Show is now on America Online. So, if you would like to contact us or have a great story to tell, you can reach us at mauryshow@aol.com. That's mauryshow@aol.com. We want to hear from you. Once again, if you have any information about any of the missing children whose photographs we've been featuring on the show today, please contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at this number, 1-800-843-5678. That's 1-800-843-5678. I want to thank all of you. I mean, I don't think I've really ever done a show in which we can really get the feeling that you've given us about what it's like to be all of a sudden in the whole feeling and world of terror. And all of you have lived it, and thankfully you've come out terrifically. Appreciate your coming. Thank you all very much. Thank you out there, everybody. Until next time, America. Tomorrow, sometimes going online can cost you a lot more than just a few dollars. Meet people who say the internet ruined their lives. Tomorrow.
Promotional consideration provided by